This is the Venturing Angler Podcast. I'm Tim Harden. In this episode, we'll be chatting with Jim Klug of Yellow Dog Fly Fishing Adventures about the current state of fly fishing travel. For your reference, this episode is being recorded on January 5th, 2022. We'll be talking about how things have gone since the pandemic hit and where things are headed. Let's chat with Jim. Okay, we're here with Jim Klug of Yellow Dog Fly Fishing Adventures. Jim, at long last, welcome to the Venturing Angler Podcast.
Well, thanks, Tim. Appreciate you having me on.
So you're one of the people I've been thinking about the most over the last 2 years, and I can't believe we're going to be looking back at the last 2 years to some extent to talk about the state of travel within the fly fishing industry. 2 years is a long period of time, but what has been the overall impact on specifically fly fishing travel with COVID?
Is there something going on I don't know about? Because I wasn't aware of COVID. Is that? No, it's, I kind of have to laugh about it a little bit now because the last 2 years have been interesting, as you can imagine. I mean, we're a company that is 100% focused on travel and the vast majority of that is international travel. And so, we've certainly been rocked by this, as has anyone in the travel industry and so many other industries. I mean, it's impacted pretty much everybody on some level. But yeah, the travel business has taken a hit. The international lodges have taken a hit. It's been an interesting 2 years. It's hard to believe we're still sitting here talking about this 2 years later and still dealing with this. But it's been a learning process for sure. I feel super fortunate that our company Yellow Dog has been able to not only weather the storm, but really I think kind of take advantage of some of the lessons and things that we've gotten very good at as far as taking care of our clients, trying to take care of the lodges and respect those partnerships that we have and really, do what we can to continuously find solutions for our customers, because it has been, these are uncharted waters. We laugh about it now, but, 2 years ago, before this thing kind of hit and blew up, we would talk to a lot of people about trip insurance, right? Which is always a good idea if you're investing a good chunk of money into a fishing adventure and not just your money, but your time, but you want to be covered. So we would talk to people about trip insurance and the things that were typically covered, which was, work conflicts or medical issues or family emergencies. And we told people at the time, it's like, well, but one thing it doesn't cover is a worldwide global pandemic, something out of a Hollywood movie. People would have laughed, right? They would have been like, what are the chances of that? But yeah, it's been an interesting 2 years, but we're still here and looking forward to a great couple of years ahead as we eventually emerge from all this.
I've been wanting to have you on the podcast to talk about your travels for a long time. And then when this all hit, I thought, well, when things stabilize and an episode won't date itself right away, I'd call you. And maybe in retrospect, that should have been June, but things, like you said at the beginning, have just been coming in waves. And so, thinking back to March 2020, I know Brian Gregson, the photographer for Yellow Dog, he had to rush back from Argentina. I'm sure you guys had clients all over the world who had to race back to the US. Is that how things really started for you?
Yeah, it closed down pretty quickly back in March of 2020, as you can imagine. And March is a huge travel month for us. So we did have people scattered all over the planet, many in very remote fishing destinations. And within a span of about 10 days, things got pretty real in a hurry. It went from being an issue of concern to, okay, now this is really starting to heat up to, all right, the world is literally shutting down. Airlines are grounding. We've got to get people back. And we did. I mean, that was, I'll never forget those first few weeks. That was a lot of moving pieces and a lot of late night weekend phone calls. And, again, just trying to find immediate solutions. And, that was really one of my biggest takeaways, not just from those early months of the pandemic, but really it's lasted for the last, 20 plus months, Tim, is, when things are going well and they're easy and they're right, great. It's fishing. We're having fun. You get on a plane, you go somewhere nice. It should be easy and fun. But when problems emerge and when there are challenges, and it might be, again, a medical issue, it might be an airline delay problem, or it could be something as, complex and widespread as a global pandemic that's shutting the planet down. It's like, okay, now what? Where do I go for help and support and answers? Where do I find that support? Where do I find solutions when I really need them? And that, for me has been one of the biggest takeaways for our clients is, it's really nice having somebody in your corner when you need it. Because when it's easy, anybody can do it. But when things get complicated and difficult, that's when you want to be working with people that are professionals and really know how to do this.
Yeah, I tend to always get help in these services that I don't think, that I think a lot of people might not think are necessary. But when they are necessary, it's great to have. I always use a travel agent, for example, for flights and hotel and things like that. When these types of things were happening, how were you guys able to help folks who are struggling with things? I mean, one thing that comes to mind for me right away is just the paperwork for getting in and out of countries now. But I can't do that. I can't get into Argentina by myself. I'm going to need help with that. So, what are the kinds of things that?
You kind of have to have a PhD
right.
in that stuff these days.
And it's a different language.
And it's constantly changing.
Yeah.
Yeah, oftentimes. And really, what helped in our situation, and more importantly, what helped our clients and customers is the infrastructure that we had in place. And, this is what we do. It's all we do. We have a team of close to 30 people that are focused full time on taking care of trip logistics, travel planning, and all of the little ingredients and elements that go into not just an enjoyable trip, but a smooth, problem-free trip. And of course, when there are problems, which do pop up in international travel, what then is the question? And that's where having that infrastructure, having that team, working with people that have experience and connections. And sometimes, it's, well, boy, the airline's telling me this, but we know someone, in the sales office at this particular airline, and let's call and see if we can get some more direct answers. Or, maybe there's a health authorization form delay online, and someone in a particular government, right, where you can literally call them up and say, hey, we've got a client. Here's their application number. It's being delayed for some unforeseen reason. Can you help usher this through? And that's where, again, having that team in your corner that has that experience and has those connections and those resources really makes a big difference. It's night and day, especially with everything we're dealing with now. And you just touched on it, Tim. I mean, things are constantly changing, right? The regulations, the protocols, the rules. What was in place 2 weeks ago is different than what's in place today, and what's, the way it's going to be 2 weeks from now. It's constantly evolving these days.
Yeah, and there's certainly, an angler can have peace of mind when they've got, experts in their corner. That gives a sense of how you were able to help with them. How about Yellow Dog? How did Yellow Dog? I mean, I think we all thought this was going to be 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden, 2 months later, I was wiping down groceries, but everybody was in a different, things did not change for a while after that 2 weeks. How did you all navigate through that?
Well, it was a challenge. I mean, luckily we have an incredible team of people who are super loyal to each other, loyal to the company, but most importantly, have a deep sense of commitment to the customers that we work with. And everyone here took it personally. I mean, when the world shut down and we realized this was going to be more than a couple of weeks, we were dealing with literally thousands of canceled trips. And I'll never forget this, because a couple months prior to the pandemic, as we were, starting off 2020, I was doing our annual catalog and travel guide and writing the intro letter I always do. And we had really become kind of the largest company in fly fishing travel as far as the agents that are out there. And I remember sitting here in my office thinking, God, after 20 years of building this company up, we've finally done it. We've built the biggest, what I think is, kind of most full service offering in fly fishing travel. We've really got to the spot that I've worked so hard to get to for 20 years. We're the biggest thing out there. And then I remember, a month into the pandemic thinking, oh my God, we're the biggest travel company out there. We have a problem here because we have a lot of trips on the books, and it was thousands of cancellations. And we got hit hard. We had to downsize our staff. I mean, as you can imagine, it wasn't just pumping the brakes. I mean, it came to a screeching halt as far as business and bookings go, and it was that way really for that first 6 to 8 months. It was brutal. But as I told my team every day when we came into the office, it's that old saying of how do you eat an elephant, and it's you do it one bite at a time, and that's the way we kind of tackled these challenges of all these cancellations and reschedulings and rebookings. And we made a commitment that we were going to do our very best and do everything within our power to take care of each and every client that we had and every single trip that we had on the books. And a lot of times that was unique solutions. A lot of times it took time. And I would tell clients that every day when I was on the phone with them and say, look, I understand you're frustrated. I understand we want, credits. We want future bookings. We want to get this rescheduled, but please just be patient and we'll work through this. And we did. I mean, even the difficult, very, very uptight people, of which, that was very few. Most of the clients that we work with, and I think most of the people that, consider themselves to be well-traveled anglers and that really love this industry and love the places that fly fishing takes them, most people were very kind and they were very nice and they were very patient. But that's what we counseled. We said, look, we're not going to leave this hanging. It might take us 2 months. It might take us a year, but we're going to find solutions for you and we're going to get you taken care of. And we've done that. And it's the one thing that I'm most proud of with this team of people that we have here at Yellow Dog is that everybody remained totally committed to that goal of taking care of every single client that we have. And we've done it, even the challenging ones that, I don't know that they'll necessarily be working with us again, but we never gave up from this end. We never did.
As you've just talked about this, you've been really focused on clients, but with as big as Yellow Dog is, you guys also, lodges depend on you. How did that work? I just can't imagine, if I don't know what your numbers are, but if half of a lodge's bookings are through Yellow Dog, they're probably all turning to you. How did things work out with individual lodges?
Well, that was a tough one in a lot of instances because these aren't just lodges to which you send people. These are operations to which we have, pretty deep attachments and long relationships with. It's not just, we do business with this lodge and send them clients, but these are places that maybe we've been going down there 20 years and we know the guides and we know their families. We know the staff. And so that was definitely a very personal thing for us. And, if you were a U.S. based lodge, it was tough, but there were definitely some forms of support and some resources that were available out there, where there was PPP funding, EIDL. I mean, there were some ways to, get some help and at least, take care of your people and stay in the game. Most of these international lodges did not have that. They just didn't. I mean, there were no governmental resources that said, oh, you don't have any clients for a year. You're a full-time professional saltwater guide that typically guides 230, 250 days a year, and all of a sudden that's gone to zero. Yeah, I mean, there were no resources there, in most of these countries. So it got really tough for a lot of people that, we depend on as an industry and certainly from, a traveling angler's perspective. So, we did a number of different things. We got very creative with what we called the Back on the Water program, which we kind of launched to try to get the phones ringing and trying to get people to get trips on the books for the near future and for down the road. And we did that with, protected terms and payment terms and delayed payments to lodge, but at least to get, the calendars full again and get the phones ringing. And that was pretty successful right off the bat. It was also very much appreciated by both anglers and the lodges that we were trying to do something. So that was a big one. And looking back, I think that was a real, positive as far as, being able to engage with these lodges and help out. But I will tell you, another thing we did, and I had a number of conversations with Andy Mill, who most of your listeners probably know. he did a phenomenal job early on with basically it's like some PSAs. And it started out with kind of focusing on Florida Keys guides, but then he kind of expanded the message to say, look, if you're an angler and you love the places that the sport takes you, and you realize the importance of this infrastructure being the lodges and the guides and the staff and everything that makes it possible for us to go and fish these amazing places and be turned on to these incredible resources, then remember what everybody's going through and be kind, be patient. If you can't go on your typical week-long trip where you go every year to this lodge and you have your favorite guide that you really care about fishing with, you can't make the trip this year, but you know what? Maybe think about sending a tip to that guide, what you would have tipped him. And if you have the means and you're in a position to financially do that, then be thoughtful of the people that are probably in a really tough situation. And we talked with Andy a lot about that. We spent a lot of time on the podcast that we have here called Waypoints, kind of preaching that message. And it was awesome to see how many anglers, how many of our clients, how many, traveling anglers really kind of embraced that philosophy. We had so many people, Tim, that literally would send checks into Yellow Dog and to the foundation we have, Yellow Dog Community and Conservation Foundation. They basically said, hey, would you pass this along to, Pedro or Cesar? I fish with him every year. Obviously can't do it, but this is what I typically leave him at the end of the week. Make sure he gets this. And that was awesome to see people kind of opening up their hearts and their wallets that way, because, at the end of the day, this is an infrastructure that as anglers, we need. We need these lodges there. We need those guides there when, now that the world is reopened and we're all going back, and as it continues to reopen, I mean, this infrastructure is crucial to this sport. We've got to have it. And people really stepped up and did some great things. And lastly, one of the things that we also did through the foundation is we basically took some of our biggest areas like Belize and the Yucatan and the Bahamas, and we actually did cash disbursements through the foundation for a lot of these guides and a lot of these places that it wasn't a huge amount of money, but when your income has basically gone to zero from, there's no clients and there's no guiding, to get a little bit of an infusion to say, hey, just to help you get through this, that was great. And we had a lot of clients that contributed to that effort and they donated money to that. And it was, it really made a difference.
That's terrific. With one of the things you mentioned with a lot of the clients is the rescheduling of trips. Do you think that'll have a long-term impact on these lodges if they're, for example, right now surviving on trips that were scheduled and maybe some payments were made 2 years ago? And how do you think they're going to get through that?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think it's something that oftentimes is overlooked. When we had conversations, especially that first year of the pandemic, people would say, you know what, I get that I can't go. Just put me on the books for 2023, 2022. I'm good with that. Just roll my trip. And at first, a lot of lodges did because no one realized that this would, be as long-term or as significant as it was. But the problem with that, let's say you lose your 2020 season, and then inevitably you went on and you lost your 2021 season. Well, maybe you had been paid for that with trips, right? Maybe reservations and deposits had already been submitted, so you kind of had that. But you didn't operate. And then you go looking ahead for the next couple of years, you need to have inventory to sell in order to keep income coming into your lodge. Well, if all of that inventory is now off the table because you've rolled 2 years forward, that creates a significant financial dilemma for these lodges. And I remember having a couple conversations, and again, the difficult ones were few and far between. People saying, oh, they're closed. What's the big deal? They don't have any overhead expenses, so they should be just fine. Well, not true. Lodges pay everything from, license fees to, maintenance and upkeep. Maybe if it's an Alaskan flyout lodge, they've got airplane bills that they still have to pay for, equipment and planes that they not only, have to worry about the upkeep, but they financed them out over years, or they have permit fees that they still had to pay regardless of what was going on. There is a lot of fixed expenses that continued for these operations, even though they were technically shuttered and not operating and not taking clients. But you bring up a really good point. I mean, it's not as simple as just saying, well, no big deal, we'll roll it over, because you lose 2 years of operation. you roll all those trips forward. Now you're going to operate for the following 2 years without any new income. And that's a significant financial challenge for a lot of these lodges and outfitters and guides. And yeah, it's going to take some time to work through that. There is no doubt.
The ways that you mentioned that lodges and guides were supported before in communities, do you encourage some of the same things now? Should people get connected through YDCCF? What do you recommend there?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to do it. And, not everybody in the sport is swimming in money. We get that. I mean, and that's one of the neat things about Yellow. We work with, everyone from CEOs that fly their own planes, and, money is really not an issue to, school teachers and public works employees that save up, money for years in order to go on that one bone fishing trip that's so important. So we kind of see it all, but by and large, a lot of the traveling angler market does have some capacity. A lot of those people, aside from the chaos and the, mental anguish of the last 2 years, have done okay. And if people are in a position to be thoughtful and be generous with a lot of these lodges, and especially the guides and the lodge staff, we always encourage that. And there are a lot of ways you can continue to do that. The good news is that the majority of these operations are open. And I say the majority, probably 70% of international destinations are kind of back in the game. Now they're digging out. They're in a big hole. Some lodges, didn't survive it, and others may not, because it is a big hole to dig out of. But a lot of places are reopened and back in the game. And so I would say there are direct ways that you can, support a lot of these individuals through donations to YDCCF and through, specific, guide and staff support projects. But the other great way to do it is to book, get some reservations on the books for the next few years. That's huge for these lodges to be able to get those deposits in and know that their calendars are filling up with new bookings and new business. That is a great way that the traveling anglers can kind of do their part to once again support this infrastructure.
So now that it's January 5th, 2022, and infection rates, at least from testing and all the information we have, is up a bit, where do you see things now, and where are things going?
Well, that's the $1 million question, Tim, for sure. And I will say this, I'm certainly not a doctor. I'm not an epidemiologist. So I don't want any of your listeners to, start firing off angry emails that I'm talking out of school. But it does seem like with Omicron, what we're dealing with right now, that things, while crazy contagious and the numbers are up, it does seem to be more mild. It certainly seems that, for those who are vaccinated and boosted, that it's mild, and hopefully we blow through this pretty quickly. We're already seeing, the numbers from South Africa and the UK that spiked so hard, in December and into January, are already on their way back down pretty quickly. So my hope is that we see the same thing here, and that, we know January is going to be a little spicy, but as we work our way through the month, that those numbers, continue to decline, and we can work our way into, back into some semblance of normal when it comes to living our lives and, having our kids in school and socializing with friends and certainly traveling the world. So, that's my hope. That's my expectation. I don't think anybody knows, but it certainly seems that it's moving in that direction. For the future, what can traveling anglers expect in the months and possibly the years ahead? Well, I think there's a couple key takeaways here and a couple of things that people are going to want to keep in mind. First of all, COVID protocols are ever changing. Regulations for where you can travel, what you need to do to get into some of these countries, whether it's testing protocols, paperwork, approvals. Again, I feel like, I've gotten my PhD in this over the last year or two, because it's something you just constantly have to pay attention to. I mean, 3 times in the last 2 weeks, the Bahamas have changed their entry protocols. To give you an example, things are ever changing, and that's going to stay that way for the near future. So, making sure you are up to speed on this and you don't get blindsided because what you read and planned for 2 months ago, all of a sudden you're getting ready to head off tomorrow and you're looking through everything and it's completely different. So you got to stay on top of these protocols and regulations, and it's nice to have some help with that. The other thing So I think is a big takeaway, and something that people need to keep in mind for the future is, the concept of protecting your investment, your trip investment, because it's money that, some of these trips can be fairly spendy, but it's also your time. That might be the most valuable asset that you're dealing with when you're talking about, some of these big trips. You don't get to do this every week of the year, so it's kind of a big deal. You want to protect that investment. And trip insurance, boy, we've learned a lot about the pros and cons of trip insurance throughout this pandemic. We've learned what works and what truly protects you, and we've seen a lot of the fails, and we've seen a lot of instances where these companies have not delivered. But again, a lot has been learned. And so making sure that your trip is protected with the right coverage, the right product is crucial, because as I tell people every day on the phone, Tim, we protect our home, we protect our cars, we protect our health, we protect our life. We take insurance for all of these key things in our lives. And when it comes to a $5,000 Bahamas trip or a $20,000 Seychelles trip, it probably makes sense to protect that as well. And there are good policies and good products out there, but you got to do your homework to make sure you're not buying junk, and that if you need it, it's really there to protect you and help you. So trip insurance, knowledge and support is, I think, really key in the months and probably the years ahead. It's something we highly recommend. The other thing, a big takeaway and something to think about with future trips is, who's in your corner, as we talked about a few minutes ago. Who's in your corner if things do go south? If you need help, do you have that support? Do you have someone you can turn to that is working on your behalf as your agent to find solutions? A lot of people are like, I've always been a do-it-yourself guy. I just kind of book my trip and I'm good. I know enough to do this. Well, again, when things are fine and easy and the weather's sunny and the fish are cooperating, that's great, right? That sometimes works out. But these last 2 years, that's been the big takeaway, is who has been in your corner when you've needed that help. And that's something to think about as you look to the future to, booking trips from this point on, having that agent, having those solutions that can help. I will tell you the topic of availability is huge. We mentioned that just a second ago with, a lot of these lodges have had to roll trips over. And so now they're largely booked for the next season, next 2 seasons, next 3 seasons. Availability is tighter than it's ever been. You certainly have the demand of, kind of people returning to travel with all that pent up desire to get back out there. So you've got more people that want to travel, but you also have less inventory available. The days of, okay, it's September, the kids are back in school, time for me to be thinking about my January, trip to the Caribbean to go fishing with my buddies. I've got a few months. Let's make some calls and see what's out there. Those days are long gone. You really do need to start that process earlier. And, if you used to do it 3 or 4 months out, you probably want to do it a year out now, or, 15 months out from now. That is going to be huge in order to find availability at the best lodges and also with the best guides during the best weeks, all of those things. You're going to have to start that planning earlier than you ever have in the past. But, those are really kind of, I think, the things to expect. And there's, it can be challenging. Again, it's nice to have somebody that you're working with to help you navigate those things. But there's also some positives. We've seen, areas that have been closed for 8 months, a year and a half. We still have places like New Zealand, Australia, Christmas Island, the Cook Islands that are still largely, closed. Nobody's been traveling there. And you can imagine how good the fishing is in these places after they've been rested like that. So there are some silver linings as well that as anglers, we're all kind of excited to take advantage of.
That's great. Do you think 2022 will be, it's easy to slip up there and forget what year it is, the way things have been going. Do you think 2022 will be a good year for travel?
I do. The airlines right now in January are a mess, all these canceled flights. But that's, those are short-term challenges. A third of their employees have COVID. Their infrastructure is kind of ground to a halt. They're dealing with weather delays and issues. But that's going to be a January issue, I think. The world is reopening, and most of these places have reopened. There is now a path to entry and to getting back out there and returning to the places that we love. So I think 2022 is going to be a massive year for travel. we've certainly seen kind of the massive numbers here at home in the U.S. West, right? I mean, you look at the summer of 2020 was busy because people weren't flying around the world, but they were certainly getting in their vehicle and they were driving to Montana or Colorado or Idaho. 2021 was even busier. It was crazy. A lot of people either found their way to fly fishing and to, fishing travel for the first time because of the pandemic. And a lot of people found their way back to it. Lapsed anglers that maybe did it when they were younger. And all of a sudden their options were more limited. So they're like, hey, I remember I loved fishing. Let's get back into it. So a lot more people are doing it. But yeah, the 2022 is going to be the year of kind of rediscovering the world and getting back out there. The infrastructure of flights and travel routes will be there to support it. And I think we are going to see record numbers in a lot of these places.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned 2021. It reminds me of, lack of availability of rental cars, hotel space, et cetera. Yeah. And it just really emphasizes the need to plan more and plan farther out. So we'll see what's ahead. And I'd love to touch base again as things unfold. And Jim, you mentioned the Waypoints podcast. That is a great resource for all the listeners out there to hear, more current updates about what's happening in travel. And for others who want to learn more, yellowdogflyfishing.com, on Instagram at yellowdogflyfishing, Facebook at yellowdogflyfishing adventures. And then, you'd mentioned, and we talked about a little bit, the Yellow Dog Community and Conservation Foundation. That's ydccf.org. And I really do encourage everybody to go check that out too. Jim, I really appreciate
thank you, Tim. Yeah. We appreciate the, it's great to share this with your listeners. And, we love being a resource. Again, we obviously love booking and arranging trips for people, but we also, love turning people onto these places and to these guides and these lodges and, so many of these remote locations. And, we do want to be a resource for the world to travel. We're always here to answer people's questions. And, we look forward to the next few years to helping people get back out there and return to doing what they love.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for coming on, and let's do it again.
All right. Thanks for having us, Tim. We appreciate it.